I never fancied myself much of a prisoner, but there I was, locked in a cell so dimly lit and damp that even the rats seemed to have moved out. The stone walls closed in like an overzealous hug, and the silence was thick enough to choke on. Yet, in the midst of all this gloom, I found my greatest weapon, not a sword or a spell, but my own ridiculousness. My cell was a far cry from the lively courts I was used to. No jesters, bells jingled here, only the dull drip-drip of water echoing in the shadows. I paced, my patched sleeves brushing the cold stones as I muttered to myself, weaving jokes from the bleak threads of my predicament. Is this a dungeon or a poorly run inn? I quipped aloud, voice ricocheting off the walls. If it's the latter, I demand better service and a complimentary room upgrade. No laughter answered, but the shadows seemed to twitch with amusement. In a kingdom where lies were currency and truths were as rare as a sober bard, my honesty was a dangerous sort of magic. Here, in the enemy's hands, it was my lifeline. Captain Grimwald, the commander of this gloomy fortress, was a man who clearly lacked a sense of humor. No surprise there. When he finally came to interrogate me, his heavy boots echoing ominously, I was ready. He stood over me, a towering figure clad in dark armor that seemed to swallow the meager light. His eyes, sharp and cold, searched for weakness. I gave him a smile that was part fool, part fox. So, the jester becomes the prisoner, he growled. Tell me, fool, what do you hope to gain with your petty tricks? Only to brighten your day. Captain, I replied, bowing my head in mock respect. After all, laughter is the best armor, wouldn't you agree? Though I must admit, it's a poor substitute for chainmail. His scowl deepened, but I caught the slightest twitch at the corner of his mouth. Humor, it seemed, was a thorn in his side. Days passed, though it's hard to keep track when your world is a cramped stone box. My solitude was interrupted by a flicker of rebellion in the form of Myra, a young guard whose eyes betrayed a secret amusement at my antics. Under the pretense of routine checks, she slipped me a tiny scrap of enchanted parchment. For your escape, she whispered, a conspiratorial glint in her gaze. The magic in that scrap was subtle but powerful, a charm that could open locks, but only if applied with the right timing and a dash of flair. I tucked it away like a secret joke waiting for its punchline. The moment came unexpectedly. A clatter in the corridor guard tripped over his own boots, sending a cascade of armor plates crashing to the floor. Laughter bubbled from my lips, echoing through the halls like a spell. Guards came rushing, confusion rippling through their ranks like a poorly rehearsed play. I seized the moment, unlocking my cell with the enchanted parchment and slipping into the shadows. Every step was a gambit, ducking behind pillars, mimicking the guards' shouts, and weaving through the maze-like corridors with the grace of a drunken cat. My colorful jester's garb was a beacon amidst the gloom, but it was my laughter and quick tongue that threw them off balance. Catch the fool, they yelled, but their voices faltered as I turned their own illusions against them. Mistaking each other for me, they stumbled, collided, and cursed, turning the fortress into a stage 4 slapstick farce. By the time I burst into the open air, heart pounding and breath ragged, the first rays of dawn painted the sky in hues of gold and rose. Freedom tasted sweeter than any jest I'd ever told. Yet, this was only the beginning. My escape was a signal, a promise that even in chains, a fool could outwit kings and conquerors alike. The war of illusions was far from over, but I had learned that truth, wrapped in humor, was a weapon sharper than any blade. As I vanished into the morning mist, my laughter lingered behind, a reminder to friend and foe alike, in a kingdom built on lies. The fool's truth was the greatest magic of all. But the question remained, how far could humor carry a king when the stakes were as high as the throne itself? The answer, like all good jokes, was just waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The morning mist curled like a lazy serpent through the dense forest, wrapping the ragtag army in a damp, chilly embrace that seemed to slow time itself. Jasper, the jester turned king, stood at the forefront of the motley procession. His motley clothes, a splash of irreverent color against the muted greens and browns of the wild. His bells jingled softly with every cautious step, a subtle reminder to all that even in the gravest moments, a fool's heart could still beat with courage. Behind him shuffled the army of idiots, each one a patchwork of quirks and oddities. Bramble the blunderer stumbled over a gnarled root, sending a clatter of armor plates tumbling down the slope, eliciting a chorus of groans and stifled laughter. Mira, the melancholy mage, eyes clouded with worry yet shining with quiet resolve, scanned the shadows for signs of the enemy's illusions. Sir Gafor's boisterous laughter broke the tension like a sudden summer storm, rallying the weary soldiers with the sheer force of his mirth. "Keep moving, you lot," Jasper called, his voice steady despite the knot of nerves tightening in his stomach. "Remember, truth and folly go hand in hand. If we lose sight of either, we lose everything." The forest seemed alive with whispers, some real, some conjured by the enemy's deceptive magic. Suddenly, flickering figures appeared between the trees, their forms shifting and shimmering like smoke caught in a breeze. An ambush, chaos erupted. Soldiers shouted, weapons clanged, and the ground trembled with the stampede of frightened horses and panicked feet. But Jasper's voice cut through the din, sharp and clear. "Laugh at their tricks. They feed on fear, and laughter starves them." He brandished his scepter, not as a weapon, but as a conductor's baton, orchestrating a symphony of absurdity. Sir Gafor charged, his laughter booming like thunder, disorienting the illusionary foes. Bramble, despite tripping over his own feet, managed to trip an enemy into a puddle of enchanted mud. Myra's spells, laced with a touch of melancholy and fierce determination, dispelled the shimmering deceits one by one. Victory, however small, tasted sweet. As the last illusion dissolved into mist, the soldiers found themselves grinning, breathless and enlivened. It was a reminder, if they could survive the enemy's tricks, perhaps the impossible was within reach. Night fell, draping the encampment in a quilt of stars. Around the crackling campfire, stories flew like sparks. Tales of past blunders and narrow escapes wove a tapestry of laughter and camaraderie. Even Mira, usually so reserved, found herself chuckling at Bramble's latest mishap, her gloom momentarily lifted. Jasper listened, heart swelling with pride. This was no ordinary army. These were fools, yes, but fools with spirit, wit, and an unbreakable bond forged in the fires of hardship and humor. At dawn, standing atop a windswept hill, Jasper gazed over the rugged landscape that stretched before them. The path ahead was treacherous, the battles uncertain, but the foolish light in his eyes burned bright. "Onward," he declared, "for truth, for folly, and for the kingdom that dared to believe in both." And with that, the idiot's march resumed dorkward, noisy but unstoppable. The road was long, the dangers many, but in the heart of the Jester King and his army of misfits, hope was alive, flickering like the bells on his cap, ready to ring out a new era of truth and laughter. I have always believed that truth was the sharpest weapon in a fool's arsenal, clean, piercing, and unflinching. Yet, as I sit here in the aftermath of what could only be described as a social calamity, I find myself wondering if truth, in its purest form, might sometimes be the cruelest jest of all. The day began with the usual courtly bustle, a cacophony of silk rustling, whispered schemes, and the ever-present scent of roasted pheasant and spiced wine. I strode into the council chamber, fool's cap bobbing with each step, ready to dispense my usual brand of honesty with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. My advisors were gathered: Lady Mirabelle, whose sharp eyes missed nothing, Sir Reginald, ever loyal but prone to gruffness, and Master Fizzlewick, whose eccentricity was matched only by his arcane knowledge. "We are vulnerable," I declared without preamble. "Our defenses are paper-thin, and our alliances as fragile as a soap bubble in a tempest." A heavy silence settled. Lady Mirabelle's lips pressed into a thin line, Sir Reginald's brow furrowed deeply, and Master Fizzlewick twirled his beard thoughtfully. I fancied myself a herald of brutal honesty, the kingdom's lone beacon of truth amid a sea of carefully crafted falsehoods. But as the day wore on, the consequences of my candor began to unfold. At the midday feast, my attempt to address the visiting Duke of Fenwick with unvarnished truth backfired spectacularly. "Your Grace," I said, "your new silk cloak is as gaudy as a marketplace tent and quite unbecoming of a man of your stature." Gasps rippled through the hall. The Duke's face reddened, and I could see the wheels of offense turning rapidly in his mind. What I intended as an honest observation struck like a slap, and the room's atmosphere thickened with discomfort. Lady Mirabelle later cornered me in the gardens, her expression a mixture of exasperation and concern. "Jasper," she whispered amid the fragrant blooms, "truth is not a blunt instrument to be wielded without care. There are times when silence or even a white lie serves the greater good." I bristled at the notion. Was I to become a courtier, weaving webs of deceit like the rest? Yet, beneath her words lay a wisdom I could not dismiss. That night, alone in my chambers, I gazed out at the moon-dappled courtyard. The shadows played tricks on my mind, much like the illusions we face on the battlefield. I pondered Lady Mirabelle's counsel and the uneasy alliance between honesty and diplomacy. Could I remain the fool who tells the truth without alienating those I must lead? Was there a way to balance candor with tact? To forge a path that honored my nature yet secured the kingdom's fragile peace? The dawn brought no easy answers, only the resolve to try. For a fool's journey is never straightforward, but it is one worth taking, especially when the fate of a kingdom hangs in the balance. And so, I prepare for the challenges ahead, knowing that truth, like laughter, can be both a bomb and a blade. The question remains, which will it be when the next curtain rises? But that, dear reader, is a tale for another time. The sun was dipping behind the crooked spires of the castle when I found myself wandering the royal garden, a place where the air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle and something far less wholesome. There, twisting and curling among the hedges like a vine that had grown too clever for its own good, was the whispering vine. It shimmered faintly, crimson flowers glowing softly like little lanterns in the dusk. The air around it thrummed with an energy both beguiling and unsettling. It was, quite literally, a plant of lies. I had always thought lies were straightforward affairs, deceptions, told to gain advantage or avoid consequences. But this vine, this living embodiment of enchantment, was unlike any falsehood I'd encountered. It whispered to the courtiers who passed by, weaving sweet nothings that made the bruises in their hearts feel lighter, the wounds in their bodies ache less. It promised comfort and healing, and in its presence, the world seemed a little less cruel. Yet beneath that soothing veneer lurked a subtle poison, a slow erosion of truth that threatened to unravel the very fabric of our kingdom. I paused, watching a noble woman pause beside the vine, her eyes fluttering closed as its tendrils curled gently toward her. The lie it told her was soft and tender, a balm for her grief. But the moment she opened her eyes again, they were clouded, a flicker of confusion and forgetfulness shadowing her gaze. It was a lie that healed, yes, but also one that blinded. "You look troubled," a voice said behind me. Lady Meralda stepped into the fading light, her robes trailing softly on the gravel path. "The vine has a strange magic. It soothes pain, yes, but at a cost few understand. It's a paradox," I admitted, turning to face her. "A lie that heals, but also harms. How can I, the one who must speak truth, reconcile that?" She smiled faintly, her silver hair catching the last rays of the sun. "Sometimes, truth is a blade too sharp for the soul. A gentle untruth can be a salve, but if left unchecked, even the gentlest lie can grow poisonous." Her words echoed in my mind as we walked to the healing chamber, where soldiers from the front lines lay recovering. Lady Meralda worked tirelessly, her hands weaving herbs and spells into remedies. She shared stories of how the vine's magic had eased the pain of many, allowing them to endure wounds that would otherwise have broken them. Yet, as I watched, I noticed the subtle shadows beneath their eyes, the flickers of uncertainty in their smiles. The vine's enchantment was a double-edged sword, and the kingdom was caught in its thorns. Back at the council chamber, the tension was palpable. Sir Bumblescratch, ever earnest and clumsy, stumbled over his words while trying to report strange behaviors among the court. "It's as if the truth slips away when that vine's near," he said, his voice cracking. "People forget what's real and what's not." The room erupted into nervous murmurs. The idea that a plant could wield such power was absurd, yet undeniable. I realized this enchanted lie was not merely a deception, but a force that shaped our reality and emotions in ways we had not anticipated. Determined to confront this threat, I returned to the garden under the cloak of night. The moonlight bathed the whispering vine in a silvery glow, its flowers pulsing gently like a heartbeat. I spoke to it not with anger or command, but with questions born of bewilderment and hope. "Why do you lie to heal? What do you gain by twisting truth?" I asked. The vine responded, not in words, but in a surge of images and feelings, kaleidoscope of sorrow, longing, and desperation. It was born from the kingdom's collective need to soften harsh realities, to protect its people from unbearable truths. Yet its magic was a dangerous gift, for in healing, it also enslaved. The lie, no matter how gentle, shaped minds and hearts, making them dependent on illusion rather than reality. I stood there, caught between my oath to truth and the undeniable mercy the vine's lies offered. Could I destroy this enchantment and risk tearing away the comfort it provided? Or should I allow the kingdom to live in a delicate balance of truth and deception, knowing that both could wound or heal? The night air was thick with magic and moral complexity as I pondered the path forward. In the kingdom where only the Jester told the truth, I faced the greatest paradox of all, that some lies might be too precious to abandon, even as they threatened to unravel everything we held dear. And so, with a heavy heart and the weight of a fool's crown upon my head, I prepared to choose a choice that would redefine truth, lies, and the fate of a kingdom built on both. But as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, I knew one thing for certain. The enchanted lie was not just a threat to be vanquished, but a mirror reflecting the very soul of our world, and in that reflection, the Jester must find his way. The game of truth and illusion was far from over, and the next move belonged to me. It was a peculiar morning in the kingdom when the court buzzed louder than a beehive shaken by a clumsy child. Rumors, like wildfire on a dry summer day, had ignited a particularly nasty whisper campaign. The Jester, the very fool who had stumbled upon the throne, was but a puppet. Not just any puppet, mind you, but one controlled by some unseen hand. A shadowy mastermind pulling strings from behind the velvet curtains. Now, the Jester had dealt with many things in his short reign. Enchanted lies, absurd armies, and illusions that bent reality more than a drunken acrobat bends a pole. But nothing quite tickled his fancy like the idea of being a puppet. A puppet, he muttered, spinning one of his colorful bells between his fingers. If I'm a puppet, then I demand better strings. These feel cheap. The first to fan the flames was Lady Malvella, the Queen's former advisor, who had taken to skulking about the court like a cat eyeing a particularly nervous mouse. She had a talent for twisting words until they snapped like brittle twigs, and her latest trick was painting the Jester as a marionette dancing to a tune only the Shadow Master could hear. "Your Majesty," she had whispered at the last council meeting, her voice dripping with honeyed poison, "surely you see how convenient it is for certain individuals to have a fool on the throne." The Jester had smiled, a slow curling of lips that held more mischief than madness. "Convenient, my dear Lady Malvella. If I am convenient, then you are the court's favorite headache." But the rumor mill churned onward, and soon even Sir Bumble, the royal herald notorious for tripping over his own words and feet, was delivering garbled messages about secret puppeteers. The palace halls echoed with whispers, and the Jester knew that if he did not act, his reign would become the punchline of every tavern joke from here to the mountains. So he devised a plan, one befitting a king who owed his throne to a fool's luck and a tongue sharper than a dragon's tooth. He would hold a public audience in the palace square, a place where truth and laughter could mingle freely under the open sky. On the day of the speech, the square brimmed with expectant faces. Nobles draped in finery, commoners with dirt-smudged cheeks, and even the odd wandering minstrel who had heard tales of the Jester King's antics. Banners snapped in the wind, and the scent of freshly baked bread mingled with the sharp tang of anticipation. The Jester stepped onto the dais, his bells jingling a merry tune. Friends, subjects, and those who snuck in disguised as pigeons, he began, bowing with theatrical flair. "I stand before you not as a puppet, but as a man who once tripped over his own feet and landed squarely on the throne." Laughter rippled through the crowd, a wave that lifted the spirits of even the most skeptical. "They say I am controlled by shadows," he continued, eyes glinting. "But if that is true, then I must say these shadows are remarkably poor at sending me coherent notes. Last week, I was told to invade the neighboring kingdom with a battalion of singing frogs. I tried. The frogs refused, citing union rules. More laughter. No, my friends, if I have any strings, they are tangled in my own foolishness, and I rather like it that way. For a puppet cannot laugh at its own jokes, nor can it stumble into victory by sheer accident." The crowd erupted into cheers, the sound like a burst of sunlight through a stormy sky. Behind the scenes, Lady Malvella scowled, her carefully woven web unraveling before her eyes. Meanwhile, Sir Bumble, who had been nervously pacing the sidelines, tripped over a loose stone and fell flat on his face, a moment of slapstick that even the most serious noble could not suppress a chuckle over. Yet, as the day waned and the sun dipped below the horizon, a different scene unfolded. In the palace gardens, bathed in silver moonlight, a figure cloaked in shadows watched the festivities with unreadable intent. The Shadow Master, whose name was whispered but never spoken aloud, smiled thinly. The game was far from over. They believe the puppet show has ended, the Shadow Master murmured, voice like a silk thread sliding through the air. But the strings have merely shifted. Back in the grand hall, the Jester returned to his chambers, bells softly jingling as he removed his cap. His reflection in the mirror caught his eye, and for a moment, the Fool King pondered the strange paradox of his reign. A man who told the truth in a kingdom built on lies, yet whose own freedom was questioned by the very people he sought to lead. Puppet or not, he whispered to his reflection, I will dance to my own tune, and may it be a tune loud enough to drown out the whispers. Outside, the night deepened, and the kingdom held its breath, caught between shadows and laughter, truth and illusion. The Fool King stood at the crossroads of power, his fate as uncertain as the next joke on his tongue. And somewhere, in the tangled web of plots and prophecies, the first thread of a new conspiracy began to pull. What strings would the Jester cut? What puppets would he unmask? And could a fool truly be king without losing his soul or his sense of humor? Only time would tell. But for now, the stage was set, the players assembled, and the greatest act of all was about to begin.